"Get out! You're embarrassing yourself." Alexander Carter grabbed his new bride's wrist the moment she stepped through the door, not to hold her, not to welcome her, to stop her from coming any closer. Claire Bennett was still on their wedding bed dress, half-loosened champagne in her hand, laughing at something Alexander had just whispered in her ear. He looked at Emma without a single trace of guilt and said, cold as a boardroom verdict, "You weren't supposed to be here yet. Go wait in the lobby." His grip tightened. His secretary didn't move. And Emma Whitmore, still in her wedding gown, flowers in her free hand, looked down at her husband's fingers wrapped around her wrist and made a decision that would destroy everything he had ever built. If that made your stomach drop, you are exactly where this story needs you. Subscribe, hit the bell, and follow Emma all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Emma Whitmore had spent 34 years being described as the calm one. Her mother used to say it at dinner parties, the way other mothers bragged about daughters who were beautiful, or charming, or bold. Margaret Whitmore would set down her wine glass and say with genuine pride, "Emma is the calm one. Emma thinks before she acts. Emma never makes a scene." And Emma had always taken that as a compliment. Even on the morning of her wedding, while her bridesmaids were crying over mascara and her maid of honor spilled champagne on the rehearsal schedule, Emma sat in the chair at the vanity, watching her reflection with steady eyes, breathing slowly, thinking clearly. She was not nervous, she was not afraid, she was certain. That was the word she kept returning to. Certain. She was certain about Alexander Carter the way she was, certain about a sound investment not because the numbers were perfect, not because the presentation was flawless, but because she had studied every angle, she had sat with every doubt, and she had chosen to believe. She had chosen him. "You look like you're solving a math problem," her best friend and bridesmaid Diana Chen said, leaning against the vanity and watching Emma's expression in the mirror. "Most brides cry. You look like you're balancing a ledger." "I'm happy," Emma said. "You look it," Diana said, but her tone carried something underneath it, something careful. Emma looked at her. "What?" "Nothing." Diana straightened up, adjusted the strap on her dress. "You look beautiful, Em, really." But Emma caught it. That small pause, that thing Diana swallowed before she smiled. She filed it away the way she filed everything quietly, neatly, in a part of her mind she could return to later. She told herself there was nothing to return to. She was wrong. The ceremony was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. 600 guests, 3 orchestras that played at different points in the evening, white peonies and gold candelabras that had been imported from France at a cost Emma had refused to think about. The kind of wedding that gets photographed for society pages, that gets referenced for years afterward as the benchmark for how these things are done. Alexander stood at the altar, and he looked at her the way she needed him to look at her. Steady, present, like a man who had made a decision and was not second-guessing it. He had dark eyes that always seemed slightly ahead of everything, like he was already 3 steps into the future, while everyone else was still catching up. He was tall, composed in his custom charcoal tuxedo, the kind of man who filled a room simply by existing in it. And when Emma walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she watched Alexander's expression, and she saw something shift in it, something that looked just for a moment like wonder. She told herself that was love. She was 34, and she had waited a long time to feel certain, and when she finally felt it, she held on with both hands. They said their vows. They signed the papers. They danced to a song Emma had chosen 6 months earlier because the lyrics said something about choosing someone quietly without fanfare, the way you choose to keep breathing, not dramatically, just steadily forever. Alexander had liked that song. He had kissed her temple and said, "Good choice." At the time, it felt like everything. The reception lasted 5 hours. Emma moved through it the way she moved through her professional life, graceful, attentive, saying the right things to the right people without ever losing track of the larger picture. She shook hands with Alexander's board members. She laughed at the right moments. She held his arm when cameras were nearby, and she meant it. She genuinely meant it every single time she looked at him. Claire Bennett was there, of course. She was always there. Claire had been Alexander's executive secretary for 6 years. She was 31, polished, efficient, the kind of woman who could manage a crisis with one hand and a calendar with the other. She wore a midnight blue gown to the wedding, tasteful, understated, exactly the right thing, and she sat at the table designated for senior staff. Emma had seated her there herself. She had not thought anything of it. She greeted Claire briefly during the cocktail hour. They had met perhaps a dozen times over the 2 years Emma and Alexander had been together. Claire was always professional, always pleasant, always just slightly too comfortable in Alexander's orbit, but Emma had chalked that up to 6 years of working closely together. She had told herself that proximity was not intimacy. She had told herself a lot of things. The reception ended at midnight. Alexander kissed Emma's cheek and said he needed to speak with 2 of his board members about something that couldn't wait until Monday. He told her to go up to the suite. He told her he would be 10 minutes. Emma nodded. She was the calm one. She could wait 10 minutes. She took the elevator to the 42nd floor. She walked down the carpeted hallway. She used the key card Alexander had given her that morning, slid it through the reader, heard the soft click of the lock releasing. She pushed open the door, and there they were. Later, Emma would think about the particular cruelty of what she saw, not the most dramatic version of betrayal, not the worst thing she could have walked in on, but something almost more devastating in its casualness. Alexander was standing near the window, his jacket removed, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. Claire was sitting on the edge of the bed, not the armchair, not the sofa, the bed, their wedding bed dressed in white linen and scattered with the petals the hotel staff had arranged that afternoon. They were talking quietly, intimately, the way 2 people talk when they are completely comfortable with each other, when there are no walls between them, when the rest of the world does not exist. Alexander's hand was near Claire's shoulder. Claire was leaning slightly toward him. And when the door opened, neither of them startled, the way 2 people would startle if they had been caught doing something wrong. Alexander looked up. Claire looked up. And the expressions on their faces were not guilt. They were inconvenience. Emma stood in the doorway. She was still holding her wedding bouquet, white peonies and trailing ivy, because she had carried it up from the reception without thinking, because it was her wedding day, and the bouquet was part of it, and now she stood there with white flowers in her hands and her wedding dress around her feet, and she looked at her husband of 4 hours standing next to his secretary in their honeymoon suite. The room was quiet. Outside Manhattan hummed 42 floors below. Alexander looked at her and said, "You're early." 3 words. Not "I can explain." Not "this isn't what it looks like." Not even "Emma, wait." Just "you're early." Like she was an appointment that had arrived ahead of schedule. Like her presence was an administrative inconvenience. Emma felt something happen inside her chest. Not breaking, that wasn't the right word. It was more like something that had been built very carefully, brick by brick, over 2 years, suddenly losing its foundation. Not collapsing dramatically, just settling, going still, going silent. She stepped into the room. She closed the door behind her. She walked to the small table near the entrance and set her bouquet down carefully, the way you set something down when you are deciding whether or not to pick it back up. Then she turned around. "Early," she said. Her voice was her own voice, steady, calm, the voice everyone always expected from Emma Whitmore. "What exactly did you think would happen tonight, Alexander?" He sighed. He actually sighed at her the way someone sighs at a question they find tedious. "Emma," he said, and the way he said her name already contained everything she needed to know. Flat, patient, like he was speaking to someone who needed things explained slowly. "Don't make this emotional. Don't make this—" She stopped herself. She breathed. "There's another woman in our honeymoon suite on our wedding night. What would the appropriate emotional response be?" "We need to be practical," he said. And then he began to explain. I explained it the way he explained board presentations, calmly, logically, without inflection. He explained that their marriage had always been at its core a strategic partnership, that her family's name brought his company the social credibility it needed during its expansion phase, that his company's growth protected the value of her family's investments, that these things were real and true and mutually beneficial, and that both of them understood this when they agreed to marry. I was right that these things were true. He was catastrophically wrong about what they meant. "I'm not saying our relationship doesn't matter," he continued, his voice, measured his eyes staying on hers with the steady confidence of a man who has never really been told no. "But Claire and I have a connection that predates you. That's a separate thing. It doesn't have to affect us." "It doesn't have to affect us," Emma repeated. "Exactly." She looked at Claire. Claire, to her credit, did not look triumphant. She looked something closer to uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to have prevented this. Not uncomfortable enough to have said, "Alexander, not tonight. Not in the honeymoon suite. Not like this." "Emma," Claire said. and her voice was careful, measured the voice of a woman who had spent years navigating powerful men. "I know this is a shock, but Alexander and I, what we have, it's been real for a long time. We kept it separate from work because that was smarter. We kept it separate from his relationship with you because that was kinder." She paused. "I'm not your enemy." Emma looked at her for a long moment. "You're sitting on my wedding bed," Emma said quietly, "on my wedding night, in my honeymoon suite, wearing a dress you picked because you knew cameras would be on you at the reception." She tilted her head slightly. "I don't think enemy is the right word, but I'm not sure kind is either." Claire's expression shifted. Just slightly, just enough. Alexander cleared his throat. "Emma, what I'd like is for the three of us to have an adult conversation about how we move forward. There's no reason this has to become—" "How long?" Emma interrupted. He stopped. "How long did you plan to keep pretending?" she said. "With me. How long was the plan?" The silence that followed was different from the silences that came before it. It had weight. It had texture. It was the silence of a man who had spent years constructing a version of reality that was now developing visible cracks. "I care about you," Alexander said. "That's not what I asked." "Emma, how long, Alexander?" He looked at her, and for just a moment, one unguarded, honest moment, she saw something in his face that was almost like respect, almost like the recognition that the woman standing across from him was not who he thought he had married. "The arrangement was in place before we started dating," he said. Emma nodded slowly. She turned and looked out the window at the lights of Manhattan. 42 floors below the city continued its business. Taxis and pedestrians and the endless, indifferent machinery of New York, moving forward the way it always moved without waiting for anyone to catch up, without caring about the rooms above it where people were quietly falling apart. She had loved this city her whole life for exactly that reason. It did not accommodate weakness. Neither did she. She turned back around. "I see," she said. "I knew you'd be reasonable," Alexander said, and the relief in his voice was so genuine it was almost insulting. "You're always I'd like you both to leave," Emma said. He blinked. "What? This is my suite," she said. "I booked it. My family's account covers it. I'd like you both to leave so I can have some time to think." Alexander stared at her. Claire stared at her. Neither of them moved. "Emma," Alexander started, "let's not be—" "Alexander." Her voice did not rise. It did not harden. It simply became very, very clear. "I am asking you on our wedding night to leave the room. I am asking you once. I will not ask you twice." Something happened in his expression, some small recalibration. He had been so certain she would bend, so certain that he knew who Emma Whitmore was, that he had mapped her reactions before she had them, that her steadiness was the same as softness. That calm meant compliant. I was beginning to understand that he had made a serious error, but he was also Alexander Carter, which meant that even in the face of evidence, his instinct was to manage rather than to listen. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said, "when you've had time to process." "Of course," she said. He picked up his jacket. He looked at her once more, that look again, the one that said she was a puzzle he hadn't expected, and then he walked toward the door. Claire stood. She straightened her dress. She looked at Emma with something that might have been pity or might have been a warning, and she said very quietly, "He does care about you, in his way." "I know," Emma said. "That was never the problem." Claire opened her mouth, closed it, and left. Emma heard the door close behind them. She stood in the middle of the honeymoon suite, white roses, champagne 42 floors above the city she loved, and she was completely alone. And she was calm, not the performing kind of calm, not the kind she put on for dinner parties and board meetings and 600 wedding guests, the real kind, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than emotion, from a place that had been quietly preparing for something without fully announcing what that something was. She walked to the window. She looked out at Manhattan. She thought about 2 years. 2 years of choosing to believe. 2 years of filing away doubts the way you file away small discrepancies in a report, noting them, but not yet alarmed. 2 years of watching Alexander move through rooms like a man who owned them and thinking, "I admire that." Not, "I wonder what he's concealing." She thought about the phone calls he took in other rooms. She thought about the evenings that ran 4 hours past what he'd said. She thought about the way Claire always seemed to know things before Emma did. Alexander's schedule, his preferences, the quiet domestic details of a man's life that a secretary doesn't usually know. She had filed all of it away, and now she opened the file. She sat on the edge of the bed, the same edge where Claire had been sitting 20 minutes ago, and she thought very carefully, not about feelings, not yet, about what she knew, about what that knowledge meant, about what she could do with it. Because here was the thing about Emma Whitmore that Alexander Carter had never fully understood, despite 2 years of sitting beside her at dinners and business functions and private evenings, where she listened more than she spoke. Emma did not manage investments. Emma was the investments. What Alexander knew, what the newspapers knew, what the society pages knew, was that Emma was the daughter of Richard Whitmore, heir to a family fortune built across 3 generations of careful, unglamorous, extraordinarily disciplined financial management. Old money, real money, the kind of money that doesn't announce itself. What Alexander did not fully appreciate, what he had perhaps never bothered to fully investigate, because he had been so focused on what the Whitmore name meant socially, was what Emma herself controlled, not inherited, not managed on behalf of her father, what she personally oversaw as the primary decision-maker since taking on her role 4 years ago. Whitmore Capital's private investment fund, 47 portfolio companies, and chief among them, one of the most significant minority stakeholders in Carter Global Technologies, through 3 layers of carefully structured holding companies that did not obviously connect back to the Whitmore name. Emma had known about this when they started dating. Alexander had not known she knew. He had known Whitmore Capital held some stake in his company. He had not known the size of it. He had not known the structure of it. He had not known that the woman he was cultivating as a social advantage was simultaneously the woman whose financial infrastructure was quietly underwriting his company's future. He had done his homework on her family's reputation. He had not done his homework on her. She stood up. She walked to her bag, the small ivory clutch she'd carried at the reception, and she took out her phone. The time was 12:47 in the morning, technically the morning after her wedding. She opened her contacts. She found the names she was looking for. She pressed call. It rang twice. M. Her brother Michael's voice, rough with sleep, but sharpening immediately because Michael Whitmore had been woken by his sister's calls before, and he had learned that when Emma called at 12:47 in the morning, you sharpened immediately. What happened? I need you to do something, she said. Tell me. The Carter Global Investment Review, the one we're scheduled to finalize next month. What about it? Emma looked out the window at Manhattan. Pause it, she said. Silence on the other end. Emma, Michael said carefully, that's a significant... I know what it is. If we pause now, it sends a signal to the market. Other stakeholders will notice. It could trigger... Michael. He stopped. She said, pause it. Another silence. Then, are you okay? I'm fine, she said. I'm very calm. That's what worries me, he said. But he said it with something in his voice that was not worry. It was something closer to belief, the kind of belief that an older sibling reserves for the moments when they see their younger sibling do something that makes them think there she is. There's the person I always knew was in there. I'll make the calls in the morning, he said. First thing. Thank you, she said. She hung up. She set the phone down. She looked at the champagne waiting beside the window. Someone had selected it for tonight, had chilled it to exactly the right temperature, had arranged the glasses so they caught the light from the city outside. She picked up one glass. She poured champagne into it. She sat down by the window alone on her wedding night in her wedding dress, and she drank it slowly. She did not cry. She did not rage. She thought. That was what Emma Whitmore did when the ground shifted beneath her, she thought. And by the time the champagne was gone and the city below had dimmed into its pre-dawn quiet, she had thought her way through to something that felt surprisingly like clarity. Alexander had believed from the very beginning that he was the one with the power in this arrangement. He had believed that because he was the CEO, because he was the one with the vision and the momentum and the media presence and the name that people recognized. He had believed it because Emma had let him believe it, not consciously, not as a strategy, but because Emma's way of existing in the world was quiet, private, understated in its power. She did not need the room to know she was there. She just needed to be there, and now she was. And Alexander Carter, the brilliant, composed, terminally self-assured CEO who had just told his wife on their wedding night that their marriage was a deal, was about to discover something that should have been obvious from the beginning. The most dangerous people in any negotiation are never the loudest ones. They are the ones who understand before the conversation even begins exactly what the other person cannot afford to lose. Emma set down her empty glass. She reached back and unzipped her own wedding dress slowly, with no drama the way you remove something you have decided you are done wearing. She folded it carefully over the back of the chair. She put on the robe the hotel had left in the bathroom. She got into the bed. She pulled the white linen up to her shoulders, and she closed her eyes. She slept. Not because she was at peace, not because everything was resolved, but because she was a woman who had learned a very long time ago that the most important thing you can do before a difficult morning is rest. Tomorrow, Alexander Carter would wake up expecting forgiveness. He would spend the day reassuring himself that Emma was emotional, that emotion was temporary, that she would come around because people like Emma always came around. Steady, reliable, practical Emma, who never made scenes, who always chose the sensible path. He would spend the day being wrong, because Emma Whitmore was not forgiving him. She was preparing. And there is a particular kind of person rarer than people think, more powerful than people expect, who is at their most dangerous. Not when they are angry, not when they are screaming, not when they are making scenes and demanding attention, but when they are completely quiet, when they have decided, when they are ready. Emma Whitmore had been quiet her whole life. She was ready now. Emma slept 4 hours, not because she was at peace, not because the night had resolved itself into something manageable, but because she was the kind of woman who had trained herself over many years of navigating high-stakes rooms to treat rest as a resource. You protect it the same way you protect capital. You don't spend it on things that aren't worth it. And crying over Alexander Carter was not worth it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She was awake by 5:30. Showered, dressed in the clothes she had packed for the following morning, simple, dark, entirely herself, before the city below had fully decided whether it was night or morning. She ordered coffee from room service. She sat by the window. She opened her laptop. She began to work. This was the thing about Emma that the people who loved her understood, and the people who underestimated her never did. Her stillness was not passivity. It was concentration. When Emma went quiet, she was not retreating. She was loading. By 7 in the morning, she had drafted 3 emails she did not send yet. She had reviewed the current structure of Whitmore Capital's position in Carter Global. She had pulled up the names of every board member she personally knew, which was most of them, because Emma had been attending financial and social functions in this city since she was 19 years old, and she had never once wasted a conversation. By 7:15, her phone rang. Michael. "I made the calls," he said without preamble. He knew her well enough not to open with "How are you?" Effective immediately, the Carter Global Investment Review is on hold. I used the standard language additional due diligence required before proceeding. Nothing inflammatory. "Good," she said. "Emma." His voice shifted. "What happened last night?" She told him. She told him cleanly and without embellishment, the way she told him things that mattered not to get a reaction, but to transfer information accurately. She told him about walking into the suite, about Claire on the bed, about Alexander's hand on her wrist, about the words he used. Michael was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "I'm going to get on a plane." "No," she said. "Emma." "Michael, I don't need you to come. I need you to stay exactly where you are and let the pause do what it's going to do. The moment you show up in New York, it becomes a family conflict. Right now it's a financial decision. Those are very different things." Another silence. "You're already 3 steps ahead of this," he said. And it wasn't admiration exactly. It was something more complicated. Something like the feeling of watching someone you love walk into a fire with complete calm and realizing with equal parts terror and pride that they actually know what they're doing. "I've had time to think," she said. 4 hours of sleep is not time to think." It was enough. She heard him exhale. "What do you need from me?" "Hold the pause. Don't explain it. If anyone from Carter's team calls, you're unavailable. If the board reaches out directly, refer them to our legal team. Don't say anything that gives them a direction to run in. And you, I'm going to finish my coffee," she said, "and then I'm going to go home." She hung up. She finished her coffee. She left the hotel without stopping at the front desk, without leaving a note, without looking back at the 42nd floor, where she had spent her wedding night, alone in a robe watching the city think. The doorman flagged her a cab. She got in. She went home. And in a different part of the city, Alexander Carter was waking up. He woke up late, nearly 9, which was unusual for him, but the night had stretched longer than planned. He and Claire had eventually moved to her apartment across town, which had always been the arrangement when things needed to be kept separate. He lay in the familiar space of her bedroom, and he stared at the ceiling, and he thought about Emma's face when he'd told her to go wait in the lobby. He thought about the way she had looked at him, not devastated, not furious, just measuring. It made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't entirely name. He reached for his phone. He had 2 missed calls from Emma's number, both from the previous evening, both before midnight, neither with a voicemail. And then nothing. No texts, no emails, no communication of any kind from his wife of now approximately 16 hours. That bothered him more than screaming would have. He called her. It rang 4 times, went to voicemail. I texted we should talk today. My schedule is clear after 2. He set the phone down and waited for the 3 dots that meant she was typing. They didn't come. He told himself she was still processing. He told himself that Emma's silence was grief, that grief needed space, that she would come around because she was a rational person. And rational people understood that situations were complicated, and that complicated situations required practical solutions rather than emotional reactions. He told himself this with the confidence of a man who had never once been forced to genuinely reckon with his own behavior. Claire made coffee in the kitchen. She brought him a cup and sat on the edge of the bed with her own and said, "Has she called?" "No," he said. "She will." "I know." "She's not the type to blow things up," Claire said. "She's too controlled, too—" She paused, searching for the word. "Managed." Alexander nodded slowly. "She'll want to find a solution that works for everyone." Claire sipped her coffee. Exactly. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was, "We're not sure anymore." Neither of them said it, because saying it would mean admitting that the woman they had both in their different ways decided to underestimate might be something other than what they assumed. So they drank their coffee. And they waited. By 10:30 in the morning, the first call came. It was not from Emma. It was from Stephen Hale, Carter Global's chief financial officer, a careful man with a decade of careful habits who had spent years navigating the gap between what Alexander wanted and what the company could actually afford. He called Alexander's cell directly, which he only did when something couldn't wait for a meeting. "Alex," he said, "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Did something happen with Whitmore Capital?" Alexander sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "I got a call this morning from their legal office. The investment review, the one we've been working toward for 6 months, it's been paused. No explanation beyond additional due diligence. But Alex, the timing is—" Stephen stopped. "It's the morning after your wedding." Silence. "Who told you this?" Alexander said. "Their attorney. Standard language, nothing hostile. But you know what a pause means in practical terms. If we don't get that commitment locked in the next 3 weeks, the expansion timeline shifts. And if the timeline shifts—" "I know what it means, Stephen." "Then you also know that the board is going to ask questions. Some of them are already asking questions. Reynolds called me 20 minutes ago. He'd heard something from a contact at— "Tell Reynolds to wait," Alexander said. "I'll handle this." "Alex, I said I'll handle it." He hung up. He looked at Claire. She was watching him with an expression he had not seen on her face before, something cautious, something that was recalculating. "The investment review," he said. Emma paused it. Claire set down her coffee. "She can do that," she said. And that was when something shifted in the room. That one question, that tiny crack in Claire's certainty. Because Claire had spent 6 years managing Alexander's world, and in all that time she had managed Emma Whitmore the way she managed most things that seemed peripheral efficiently and without deep investigation. Emma was the bride. Emma was the name. Emma was the family fortune that opened doors. She was not supposed to be the hand on the door. "How much control does she actually have?" Claire asked. Alexander didn't answer right away. He was already doing the math in his head, going back through everything he knew, everything he thought he knew, pulling at threads and finding to his growing unease that some of them led to places he had not bothered to look. "More than I understood," he said quietly. He called Emma again. This time she picked up on the second ring. "Emma," he said. And this time his voice was different. Still controlled, still the CEO's voice, but underneath it something tighter. "We need to talk." "We are talking," she said. "In person. Today. I'm busy today. Emma, he breathed. I understand last night was I understand that. But what you're doing with the investment review— I'm not doing anything with the investment review, she said, and her voice was perfectly even. Whitmore Capital is conducting standard due diligence. That's a normal process. Pausing it the morning after our wedding is not standard. Pausing it when questions arise about leadership integrity is exactly standard, she said. Alexander, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors. Surely you understand that. He went very still. Because what she had just said, the specific words she had chosen, leadership integrity, was not the language of a hurt wife. It was the language of a boardroom. It was the language of someone who had already thought several moves ahead and was now simply waiting for him to catch up. What are you doing? He said. I told you, she said. I'm busy. She hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a long moment. Then he looked at Claire and said something he had not said in a very long time, in a voice that did not belong to the CEO or the polished public figure or the man who always knew the answer before the question was finished. I think I made a mistake. Claire looked at him. With the investment, with Emma, he said. I think I fundamentally misread who she is. Emma, at that same moment, was sitting across from her family's attorney, a 63-year-old woman named Patricia Osei, who had been protecting Whitmore interests for 22 years, and who had, upon hearing the summary of the previous evening's events, set down her reading glasses and said simply, "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Emma told her everything. Patricia listened without interrupting. She had a way of listening that felt like being taken seriously, not performed attention, but actual absorption, the kind that processed and sorted as it received. When Emma finished, Patricia picked up her glasses again, put them on, and said, "The holding structure that channels into Carter Global. Does he know the size of it?" "No," Emma said. "Does he know the structure?" "No. He knows Whitmore Capital holds a position. He doesn't know through which entities or how significant." Patricia nodded slowly. "So when he chose to marry you, he believed he was gaining social capital and access to your family's network. He did not know he was also gaining, and in last night's events, putting at risk the largest private minority stake in his own expansion plan." "That's correct." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Always." "Do you want to save the marriage, or do you want to protect yourself?" Emma didn't hesitate. "I want to protect the employees of Carter Global who did nothing wrong. I want to protect the investors who trusted our fund. And I want to make sure that Alexander Carter understands completely and permanently that there are consequences for treating people as instruments." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, not warmly, but with something that looked like recognition. "All right," she said. "Let's talk about what that looks like." By noon, 3 things had happened in rapid succession. The first was that Harold Reynolds Carter Global's longest-serving board member, a 70-year-old institution who had been on the board since before Alexander had taken over, called an emergency board inquiry. Not a full meeting, not yet, but a preliminary inquiry into what he described in his internal message as concerning developments regarding senior leadership disclosure obligations. The second was that a financial reporter from a major business publication left a message for Alexander's PR team asking for comment on reports of instability in the Carter Global investment structure. The third was that Claire Bennett, who had spent the morning telling Alexander that Emma would fold, went very quiet, because Claire understood something that Alexander was still resisting. Information moved fast in this city, and the kind of information that moved fastest was the kind that touched money. Alexander's phone began ringing and did not stop. He moved through the afternoon like a man walking through a building he no longer recognized. The rooms were the same, the furniture was the same, but nothing was where he expected it to be. He managed calls. He gave reassurances he wasn't sure he could keep. He told his PR team to prepare a statement about the investment pause without explaining what had caused it. He sat in the back of his car between meetings and stared at Emma's contact in his phone and felt for the first time in many years something that he did not have an efficient system for managing. Fear. Not the professional kind, not the strategic kind, the personal kind, the kind that lives below the sternum and does not respond to logic. He called her again at 2 p.m. She answered. "I need to meet with you," he said. "Today, please." There was a pause on her end, a real one, not calculated, just considered. 4 o'clock, she said. My father's office. His stomach tightened. Her father's office. Richard Whitmore's space-neutral territory that was also emphatically not his territory. She was choosing the location deliberately, and they both knew it. Fine, he said. 4 o'clock. He arrived at 3:55 because he was always early. It was one of the tools he used. Arriving first meant controlling the spatial dynamic of a room before the other person entered it. Emma arrived at 4 exactly. She was wearing dark slacks and a pale blouse, and she looked completely like herself, composed, unhurried, her dark hair pulled back simply. She set her bag down on the conference table. She sat down. She folded her hands. She did not offer him coffee. She did not make small talk. She looked at him and waited. Emma, he said, I owe you an apology. All right, she said. He had prepared for various reactions: anger, tears, a negotiation. He had not prepared for all right delivered in a tone that suggested she was logging the apology, the way she logged data noted filed relevance to be determined. What happened last night was... He stopped, tried again. I handled it badly. You did, she agreed. I should not have been in that suite with Claire. I should not have spoken to you the way I did. He looked at her directly, because he knew that direct eye contact rated sincerity, even when sincerity was complicated. I'm sorry. I believe that you're sorry, she said. I think you're sorry because the investment review is paused and the board is asking questions and your phone has been ringing all day. I think you're sorry about the consequences. I'm not sure that's the same thing as being sorry about the act. He opened his mouth. Don't, she said, not harshly, just firmly. Don't tell me I'm wrong about that. We're past the part of this conversation where managing my perception is useful. He closed his mouth. For a moment, just a moment, something genuinely uncomfortable moved across his face. Not performed discomfort, real discomfort. The kind that comes when someone says a true thing about you, and you know it's true, and you've run out of ways to reframe it. What do you want? He said. I want to know the truth, she said. All of it. Not the version you've decided I can handle. The actual truth about you and Claire, and when this started, and what you intended when you asked me to marry you. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, It started 4 years ago. She didn't move. Before you, he said. Well before. Claire and I, it was never simple. We tried to end it when things with you became serious. We did end it technically, but ending something doesn't always mean... He stopped. It doesn't always mean what you think it means. Did you intend when you proposed to me to continue your relationship with her? The pause before his answer told her everything she needed to know about the answer. I thought it would be different, he said. I thought I could compartmentalize. Compartmentalize, she repeated. You thought you could compartmentalize your wife. Emma. Did you love me? She said. Any part of this was any part of it real? And this was the question that cost him something. She could see it the way it landed, the way he had to actually sit with it, rather than answering immediately. Alexander Carter always had an answer ready. The fact that this question made him pause meant something. She wasn't sure if it meant what she hoped. I respected you, he said. Genuinely. I still do. I think you're one of the most capable people I've ever met. He looked at his hands. I don't know if I let myself feel more than that. I think I decided what we were before I gave it a real chance to become something. Emma nodded slowly. That's the most honest thing you've said to me, she said. Possibly ever. He looked up. I appreciate that it cost you something to say it, she continued. And I want to be honest with you in return. What happens with the investment review, what happens with the board inquiry, none of that is revenge, Alexander. I need you to understand that. I'm not doing any of this to punish you. Then what are you doing? I'm doing what I should have done 6 months ago, she said. I'm asking the questions I should have asked before I signed those papers. I'm doing the due diligence I convinced myself wasn't necessary because I wanted to believe in something. She met his eyes. I believed in you. You made it easy to believe in you, and then you made it impossible to keep believing, and now I have a responsibility to the people whose money is in your company to make sure that the man running it is who he says he is. The silence between them had a different quality now, not hostile, not soft, something more complex than either the silence of two people who are finally being real with each other and finding that the reality is both better and worse than the performance had been. The board is going to push for my removal, he said. It was not a question. That depends on what they find, she said. And what will they find? Emma looked at him steadily. That depends on what there is to find. I understood what she was not saying. He was not stupid. It was important to remember that about Alexander Carter even now. He was not a good husband. He was not an honest partner, but he was not stupid. And what Emma was not saying was, if you have hidden other things, things that go beyond the personal things that affect the company's integrity, I will find them, and I will not protect you from them. There are things the board doesn't know, he said slowly. Emma waited. Claire's role in certain decisions, her access to information that she shouldn't have had in her position. I allowed the professional and the personal to overlap in ways that weren't appropriate. He exhaled. I didn't think it mattered. I thought I could manage both. You thought you could manage everything, she said. That's been the problem from the beginning. He nodded. And that nod, that simple, unguarded nod, was somehow more devastating than anything that had come before, because it meant he knew. He had always known on some level that the juggling act was unsustainable. He had just believed that when it fell apart, he would be able to catch it before it hit the ground. He had not accounted for Emma. What happens now? He said. Now, she said, picking up her bag and standing. You go home. You get your attorney. You prepare for a board inquiry that is going to be thorough. She paused. And you stop calling Claire from your work phone because your communications are going to be reviewed, and anything on your company devices is discoverable. He stared at her. I'm trying to help you, she said. Not because I owe you that, but because there are 4,000 people employed by your company who didn't make the choices you made and don't deserve to pay for them. She walked to the door. Emma, he said. She turned. I'm sorry, he said again. And this time it was different. This time it had nothing to do with the board or the investment review or the calls flooding his phone. This time it had the particular unguarded quality of a man who has understood something too late and has no mechanism left for pretending he hasn't. Emma looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. It doesn't change anything, but I know. And she walked out. She walked down the corridor and into the elevator, and she pressed the lobby button, and she stood with her back straight and her hands quiet at her sides, and she did not let herself feel it, not yet, not hear the particular grief of a particular kind of loss, not the loss of Alexander Carter, the man, but the loss of the thing she had built in her mind around him, the carefully constructed belief, the thing she had chosen brick by brick and had been so certain about. The elevator opened. She walked through the lobby. She pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon air, and she felt it then, just for a moment, just a few seconds on the sidewalk, with the city moving around her and the sun on her face. She felt it. Not rage, not devastation, something quieter than both. The particular sadness of finding out that the thing you were certain about was built on someone else's fiction. She let herself have it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she took a breath. Then she walked to where her car was waiting. And while Alexander sat in her father's empty conference room trying to understand how completely the morning had turned, and while Claire sat in her apartment watching her phone and wondering why Alexander hadn't called, and while the board of Carter Global prepared questions that did not yet have answers, Emma opened her laptop in the back seat and returned 3 emails and made 2 calls and did not waste another moment. Because she was not finished. She was nowhere close to finished. The pause on the investment review had triggered exactly what she expected it to trigger. What she hadn't told Alexander, what she hadn't told anyone except Patricia and her brother, was that the pause was not the move. The pause was just the opening. The real move was what came next. And it was already in motion. Patricia Osei had been practicing law for 38 years, and in those 38 years, she had seen marriages dissolve in every possible configuration of human weakness: greed, cowardice, cruelty, simple boredom, dressed up as something more dramatic. She had watched powerful men crumble under the weight of their own secrets and watched quiet women walk out of courtrooms with everything. She was not easily impressed. But sitting across from Emma Whitmore at 7 in the morning, 3 days after the wedding, watching Emma lay out a sequence of financial documentation with the calm precision of someone who had been preparing for exactly this moment, Patricia Osei felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt impressed. "Walk me through it again," Patricia said. "From the holding structure." Emma turned a page. "Whitmore Capital holds a direct stake in Carter Global through our primary fund." That's the piece Alexander knew about or suspected. What he didn't know is that we also hold positions through two subsidiary vehicles, Meridian Equity Partners and the Harlow Growth Fund. Both established before Alexander and I started dating. Both structured specifically to maintain distance between the Whitmore name and the investment. Combined exposure. Approximately 19% of Carter Global's outstanding equity, Emma said, which makes us collectively the second largest shareholder in the company. Patricia set down her pen. Emma, she said slowly, does he understand what that means? He's beginning to, Emma said. He will fully understand it by the end of the week. Patricia looked at her for a moment. You've been sitting on this for 2 years. I've been managing it, Emma said. There's a difference. And during those 2 years while you were managing a 19% stake in his company, he believed you were his wealthy girlfriend, Emma said, and then his appropriate wife. She turned another page. He did research on my family. He did not do research on me. Patricia picked up her pen again. All right, then here's the question that matters. Given your position, what do you actually want to happen? Emma had been waiting for that question. Not because she didn't know the answer, she had known the answer for 72 hours, had turned it over and examined it from every angle the way she examined everything, but because the moment you said it out loud to your attorney, it stopped being a private thought and became a direction. I want 3 things, she said. First, I want the board to conduct a genuine investigation into Claire Bennett's access and influence inside the company. Not to destroy her, but because what she had access to represents real governance failures that need to be corrected for the company to function properly. Second, I want Alexander removed from his operational role pending that investigation. Not permanently, that's for the board to decide. But the investigation can't be credible if he's running the company while it's happening. And third, Emma looked at Patricia directly. I want the divorce to proceed on terms that reflect the actual nature of what I brought to this marriage. Not just social access, the financial infrastructure, all of it. Patricia nodded slowly. That third piece is going to be the complicated one. I know, Emma said. That's why I'm talking to you first. Patricia almost smiled. Give me 48 hours, and Emma, don't talk to him again without me present. Emma stood, picked up her bag, buttoned her coat. I already told him everything he needs to be afraid of, she said. There's nothing left to say until the board meeting. She walked out of Patricia's office into a Tuesday morning that felt nothing like a morning after a wedding should feel, and everything like the beginning of something she hadn't had a name for yet. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday. In the 48 hours between Tuesday morning and Thursday afternoon, the world of Carter Global Technologies shifted in ways that Alexander would later describe in a rare moment of unguarded honesty as feeling like standing on a floor that he had always believed was solid and discovering it was glass. On Tuesday afternoon, Harold Reynolds called an emergency session of the Governance Committee, a smaller, faster-moving body than the full board designed specifically for situations requiring immediate attention. Reynolds was 70 years old and had survived 4 CEOs, 2 market crashes, and 1 genuinely catastrophic product failure that had nearly ended the company in its early years. He had a particular talent for recognizing the difference between a crisis that made noise and a crisis that had roots. This one, he told his assistant on the way to the meeting, had roots. What came out of the Governance Committee session was a formal request, not yet a directive, but a formal request for Alexander to provide a complete account of Claire Bennett's role in the company, including a documentation of every meeting she had attended, every communication she had been party to, and every decision she had influenced in her capacity as executive secretary. It was the word influenced that Alexander's attorney flagged as significant, because influenced meant the committee already believed there was something to find. Alexander received the formal request at 4 p.m. on Tuesday. He read it twice. Then he called his attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Garrett Cole, who had been managing Alexander's legal affairs for 8 years, and who said upon reading the request himself, "Alex, I'm going to need you to be completely honest with me about something." "Ask," Alexander said. "Is there anything in her communications, in her access to confidential materials, in any decisions she was involved in, anything that if it came out would look like you allowed a personal relationship to compromise your professional judgment?" Alexander was quiet. "Alex." "There are some things," Alexander said. "They're not criminal, but they're not clean either." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then, "How not clean?" Alexander told him. And Garrett, who had managed Alexander's affairs through genuinely difficult situations and who was not a man prone to visible alarm, said quietly, "We need to get ahead of this. Today, not tomorrow. Today." Meanwhile, Claire was not sitting still. Claire Bennett had spent 6 years learning how power worked in Alexander's world, and one of the things she had learned was that in a crisis, the people who moved first shaped the narrative. She called her own attorney on Tuesday morning, a decision Alexander did not know about until much later. She began reviewing her own communications, her own records, assembling her own version of events. She was not naive about what an investigation would find. She was also not naive about what an investigation might miss if the right information was presented in the right order. She called Alexander at 6 on Tuesday evening. "They're going to go through everything," she said without preamble. "You know that." "I know," he said. "Alexander." Her voice was careful, precise. The voice she used when she was managing something difficult, the voice that had served him so well in every professional crisis for 6 years, and that he now heard differently. "I need to know something. When you talked to Emma yesterday, what did you tell her?" He paused. "I told her the truth," he said. Silence on Claire's end. "How much of it?" she said. "Enough." "Alexander." And now her voice had an edge he hadn't heard before. Not anger exactly, something sharper. "Did you tell her about the Harlow account?" He went still. "What about it?" he said. "The expense approvals, the ones I signed off on. Did you tell her those existed?" "I told her there were overlaps between the professional and personal. I didn't go into specifics." Another silence, longer this time. "She's going to find them anyway," Claire said. "She's not doing this emotionally, Alexander. She's doing this like an investor, like someone who's been reading a company's books and found a discrepancy and is now pulling at every thread methodically." He knew she was right. That was the thing about Claire. She was perceptive when it mattered. She had always been the person who could read a room before he could, who could tell him which board member was shifting before the shift became visible, who had made herself genuinely indispensable in ways that had nothing to do with sentiment. He had built his professional world around her capability, the same way he had built his social world around Emma's name, and the recognition of that, of how deliberately, how efficiently he had used both women for different purposes, landed in him now like something cold. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want to control what comes out," she said. "I want to present our version before her version becomes the only version." "And what is our version?" A pause. "That we made personal choices that blurred professional lines in ways that we're now committed to correcting," she said. "That the relationship existed, but never fundamentally compromised any decision that harmed the company. That the expense approvals were within her authority as executive secretary and were approved in good faith." "Were they?" he said. The pause before her answer was almost exactly as long as the pause before his answer to Emma's question about the marriage. "They were within the technical limits of my authority," she said. He understood what she was not saying. "Claire," he said, "I think we need to talk separately, with our attorneys." Another silence, longer. And in that silence, something shifted between them, something that had been weight-bearing, that had held their particular arrangement together for 4 years, quietly giving way. "Yes," she said finally. "I think we do." She hung up. Alexander sat alone and thought about the particular mechanics of how a structure collapses, how it's never the visible crack that destroys it, but the accumulated stress in the places you weren't watching. He had not been watching Emma. He had been so certain he knew what she was that he had never looked closely enough to see who she was. Thursday arrived with the particular weight of a day everyone in a building has been dreading. The Carter Global Board meeting was set for 2 in the afternoon. By 10 in the morning, the lobby of the company's Midtown headquarters had a different quality to it, the kind of tense, overmanaged quiet that precedes something significant. Emma arrived at 1:45 with Patricia beside her, and Michael, who had flown in from Boston despite her telling him not to, walking half a step behind them. She wore charcoal gray. She carried a single leather portfolio. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had come to conduct business. The boardroom held 14 people. Alexander was already there, seated, his attorney Garrett beside him. Reynolds and 6 other board members sat along one side of the table. Claire was not present. She had been formally asked not to attend pending the investigation. The head of the company's external audit firm sat at the far end. Alexander looked at Emma when she walked in. She looked back at him. In that exchange, 3 seconds, maybe 4, there was an entire conversation that neither of them spoke aloud. He looked like a man who had spent the previous 72 hours understanding something he wished he had understood earlier. She looked like a woman who had spent the same time being completely certain. She sat down. Patricia opened the portfolio. Reynolds said, "Thank you all for being here. Given the nature of what we're discussing today, I'd like to establish at the outset that this is a governance inquiry, not a personal proceeding. We're here to understand facts, not to assign blame in advance of a complete picture." "Understood," Emma said. Alexander nodded. Reynolds looked at Emma. "Ms. Whitmore, or I suppose at this point the question of how to address you is itself somewhat—" "Emma is fine," she said. "Emma, Whitmore Capital's decision to pause the investment review has had significant market implications. I'd like to understand from your perspective what prompted that decision." Emma opened the portfolio. She did not look at Alexander. "3 things," she said. "First, the morning after our wedding, I became aware of information suggesting that Carter Global's CEO had maintained an ongoing personal relationship with a direct report over a period of years, during which time that direct report was given access to confidential materials and participated in decisions that fell outside the normal scope of her role." Silence. "Second," Emma continued, "upon reviewing our position in the company in light of this information, our team identified a pattern of expense approvals connected to Ms. Bennett's account that warrant closer examination. These approvals were within the technical limits of her authorization, but appear in aggregate to reflect a pattern inconsistent with standard executive secretary responsibilities." Reynolds leaned forward. "You're saying the expenses suggest a broader role than her title indicated." "I'm saying they suggest the professional boundaries were not maintained," Emma said, "which is a governance issue regardless of the personal context." "And the third reason?" Reynolds asked. Emma looked up. She looked at Alexander. She said, "The third reason is that a company whose CEO is willing to conceal a significant conflict of interest from his own board is a company whose investment profile needs to be reassessed. Not because the company is fundamentally unsound, but because the person at the top has demonstrated a willingness to prioritize personal arrangements over professional transparency. And that is a leadership integrity question that our fund cannot ignore." The room was very quiet. Alexander's jaw was tight. He was holding himself with the controlled stillness of a man who is being very careful not to say anything he can't take back. Garrett leaned toward him and said something quietly. Alexander nodded. Then he said to the room, "I'd like to make a statement." Reynolds nodded. Alexander straightened. He looked around the table at the board members who had known him for years, who had watched him build this company, who had believed in his vision through the difficult stretches and celebrated with him through the good ones. He looked at each of them, and something in his face changed. The CEO composure didn't disappear entirely. It was too deeply built for that, but something underneath it shifted. "I made choices," he said. "Personal choices that I allowed to intersect with professional responsibilities in ways that I told myself were manageable and that were in retrospect not manageable. I want to say that clearly without equivocation because you deserve a clear statement and not a managed one." He paused. "I have been a good CEO for this company in most of the ways that matter. I believe that. But I have not been a transparent one in all of the ways that matter. And that gap between the leader I performed and the leader I was is real, and it is the board's right to examine it." The silence that followed that statement was different from the silences that had come before it in the preceding days. It was not hostile, it was not cold. It was the silence of people who had been braced for deflection and received instead something they hadn't expected. Emma looked at him. She felt something she would not have called it softness exactly, but something adjacent to it. The recognition that the man sitting across from her was capable of this particular kind of honesty when the performance finally became impossible, and that it had taken losing everything he thought he controlled to get there. She wished she had met this version of him first. She filed that thought away. Reynolds said, "Thank you, Alexander." He looked around the table. "I'd like to move to the question of next steps." What followed was 2 hours of methodical, careful, professional process. The kind of process that large institutions use to handle the moments when their human elements fail them. Not dramatic, not punitive, but inexorable, like water finding the level. The board voted 6-2 to place Alexander on administrative leave pending the completion of a formal external audit of Carter Global's governance practices over the previous 3 years. He would retain his equity position. He would not retain his operational authority. The audit would be conducted by an independent firm. Its scope would include Claire Bennett's access and expense approvals. Its findings would be presented to the full board within 60 days. Claire received formal notification that her executive access had been suspended pending the audit. Her attorney had been in contact with the board's counsel since Tuesday. A separation agreement was already being drafted. When the meeting ended, people began to gather their things to move toward the door in the quietly purposeful way of people who have finished a difficult task and are eager to be somewhere else. Alexander did not move immediately. He sat at the table while the room emptied around him, and he looked at the surface in front of him, and he was very still. Emma was almost at the door when she heard him say her name. She turned. The room was nearly empty. Patricia was in the hallway. Michael was near the elevator. It was just Emma and Alexander, and the particular quality of silence that follows a verdict. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She came back to the table. She stood on the opposite side from him. "Yes," she said. "When did you decide?" he said. "Was it that night in the suite, or had you already—" "I decided that night," she said, "when you grabbed my wrist." He flinched. She saw it a real flinch, not performed. "I'm not proud of that," he said. "I know," she said. "Emma," he looked up at her, was there ever a point where you thought what we had was real, before all of this?" She considered the question carefully, the way she considered everything. "Yes," she said. "For a long time. I thought it was real, and I chose to believe it was real, and I was very careful about that choosing. Because that's what I do. I'm careful." She held his gaze. "But careful doesn't mean blind. It just means I gave you every possible benefit of the doubt before I stopped." "I didn't deserve that," he said. "The benefit of the doubt." "No," she said. "You didn't." He nodded, looked back down at the table. She picked up her portfolio. "The company is going to be all right," she said. "The fundamentals are good. The audit will be difficult, but it will also be clarifying. Whatever comes out of it, you'll have built something real, Alexander, underneath all the rest of it. That doesn't disappear." He looked at her. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because it's true," she said. "And because I'm not doing this to destroy you. I want you to know the difference." She walked to the door. "Emma." She paused. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not because of the board, not because of the audit, because of you. Because you deserved better than what I gave you, and I knew that somewhere, and I chose not to let it change my behavior. I'm sorry for that specifically." Emma stood in the doorway for a moment. She thought about the woman who had walked into that hotel suite 4 days ago in a wedding gown holding white flowers, believing in something that turned out not to exist in the form she had imagined. She thought about 34 years of being the calm one. She thought about what it had cost her and what it had given her to be the kind of person who absorbs and considers and waits and chooses carefully, who never makes scenes, who files things away and comes back to them when the time is right. She thought about the fact that she was standing here 4 days out from the worst night of her life with her portfolio under her arm and her attorney in the hallway, and a board that had just made exactly the decision she believed it should make, and she had not screamed, had not begged, had not performed her pain for anyone's benefit. She had simply shown up and told the truth and let the truth do what truth does when it's given the right room. She thought about all of that. Then she said, "I know," and she walked out. She walked down the corridor and past the elevator where Michael was waiting past the lobby, where Carter Global employees who had no idea what had just happened in that room were going about there Tuesday afternoon, and through the glass doors and out into the city. Michael fell into step beside her. He didn't say anything for half a block. Then he said, "Are you okay?" "I'm working on it," she said. "That's not the same as yes." "No," she agreed. "It's not." They walked another half block. "What happens now?" he said. Emma thought about the 47 portfolio companies she managed. She thought about the 19% stake in a company that was about to go through 60 days of scrutiny that would either clarify its value or reveal something she hadn't found yet. She thought about the divorce proceedings that Patricia would begin drafting tomorrow morning. She thought about the particular quality of freedom that is indistinguishable from grief in the first days before you've had enough time to tell them apart. She thought about the word that had felt so certain 3 weeks ago when she stood in front of a mirror in a wedding dress and watched her own reflection. Certain. She thought, I am still certain. Just about different things now. Now, she said to Michael, I go back to work. He looked at her sideways. You've been working this entire time. I've been managing a crisis, she said. That's different from work. Work is what comes after. He was quiet. Then, you know what the worst part of all this is from where I'm standing? Tell me. He didn't know what he had, Michael said simply. That's the whole story. That's the only story. He had the most capable person in any room he ever walked into, and he looked right at her and saw a social advantage. He shook his head. That's not just bad judgment. That's a particular kind of blindness that I don't think you can fix. Emma thought about that. She thought about what it meant to be seen clearly versus being seen usefully. She thought about the years she had spent being valued for her steadiness, her calm, her capacity to manage, and how rarely that valuation had extended to genuine curiosity about who she was underneath those qualities, what she wanted, what she feared, what it cost her to always be the calm one. She thought about the fact that in 4 days of genuine crisis, she had not once stopped to ask herself if she was okay. She had managed, she had planned, she had executed, and she was good at it. She was genuinely, exceptionally good at it. But sometime soon, not today, maybe not this week, she was going to need to find a room by herself and let the whole weight of the last 4 days land on her without moving to absorb or redirect it. She was going to need to grieve the fairy tale. Not Alexander specifically, not the man, but the idea of him, the version of the future she had built so carefully around that choice. But not yet, because the real move, the one she had told Patricia, was already in motion. The one that went beyond the board meeting and the audit and the administrative leave. That move was about something larger than Alexander's tenure as CEO or Claire's separation agreement or even the divorce settlement. It was about what came next, for Emma, for the company, for the 4,000 people whose livelihoods depended on an institution that needed to be steadied, restructured, and redirected by someone who understood both its financial architecture and its human cost, someone who had 19%, someone who had been studying it for years, someone who had been very, very patient. Michael's car was waiting at the curb. He held the door. Emma paused before getting in. She turned and looked back at the building they had just walked out of. 42 floors of glass and steel, Carter Global's name across the top. The building Alexander had been so proud of, the building he had pointed to in their first month of dating and said, "That's mine, I built that." She looked at it for a moment. Then she got in the car. "Where to?" the driver asked. Emma opened her portfolio. She pulled out a document she had been carrying since Tuesday, a draft 6 pages that she and Patricia had been refining in every available hour. She looked at the first line. Whitmore Capital Strategic Review, Carter Global Technologies. Proposed governance restructuring and path to long-term stability. "The office," she said. The car pulled away from the curb. And Emma Whitmore, 4 days married and already certain about what came next, began to read. The 60-day audit began on a Monday. Emma knew the exact moment it started because Patricia sent her a single text at 8:53 in the morning. They're in. She read it at her desk, set the phone face down, and returned to the document she had been reviewing since 7. She did not allow herself to pause. She did not allow herself to imagine what it looked like inside Carter Global's offices. At that exact moment, the auditors moving through corridors with their laptops and their questions, the employees watching from their desks with the particular unease of people who have been told that something is being examined without being told what exactly is wrong. She had been that employee once, years ago, early in her career, before she understood that the people conducting the examination were not the threat. The examination itself was the answer to the threat. She understood it now from the other side. She turned another page. The document in front of her was not the governance restructuring proposal that one was finished, polished already in Patricia's hands. This was something else, a longer-term analysis she had started drafting 4 days after the board meeting, in the quiet hours after Michael flew back to Boston and Diana stopped calling twice a day to check on her, and the immediate noise of the crisis settled into the steadier, more demanding work of what came after crisis. She was mapping Carter Global's actual value. Not its market value, not its stated value, not the value Alexander had presented to investors in his quarterly reports. Its actual value, the products that worked, the teams that performed, the operational structures that had been quietly, competently built by people who would never appear in a press release. She was pulling it apart the way a careful buyer pulls apart a company before acquisition, looking for what was real underneath what was performed. What she found surprised her, not because it was bad, because it was better than expected. Carter Global stripped of Alexander's personal mythology, stripped of the governance failures and the conflicts of interest and the managed narrative he had constructed around himself, was a genuinely strong company. Its core technology division had filed 11 patents in the previous 2 years, 3 of which represented real advances in enterprise security infrastructure. Its mid-market sales operation was lean and effective. Its engineering team had a retention rate that most companies in the sector would have paid for. Someone somewhere in that organization had been building something real, while the man at the top was busy managing his personal arrangements. Emma found that simultaneously clarifying and heartbreaking, because it meant the company didn't need saving, it needed steadying. And steadying was something she knew how to do. Diana called on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks into the audit and said, "I need you to eat dinner with me, not a working dinner, an actual dinner." "I'm in the middle of something," Emma said. "You are always in the middle of something. That is my point." "Diana." "Emma." Diana's voice dropped the bantering tone it had been carrying. "I'm serious. When did you last sleep more than 5 hours? When did you last do something that wasn't work or legal strategy or financial analysis?" Emma was quiet. "I'm fine," she said. "You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true." "Emma." Diana paused. "It's okay to not be fine. You know that, right? You went through something genuinely terrible. The fact that you handled it brilliantly doesn't mean you don't get to be affected by it." Emma looked at the document in front of her. The numbers were still clear. The analysis was still sound. But Diana wasn't wrong. She had been awake since 5 that morning. She had eaten a sandwich at her desk at noon. She had not, in the 23 days since the board meeting, done a single thing that was not connected to strategy or legal process or financial review. She had been loading for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to simply put something down. 7 o'clock, she said. "You pick." Diana picked a small Italian place on the Upper West Side that had no pretensions and no press and terrible lighting and the best carbonara in the city. They sat in the back. They ordered wine. Diana talked about her own life, her job, her apartment renovation, a man she had met at a friend's birthday dinner who she was cautiously interested in, and Emma listened and laughed at the right moments and ate her pasta and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Normal, just for 2 hours. Then Diana put down her fork and said, "Tell me how you actually are." Emma looked at her. Diana was one of the only people who could ask that question and mean it precisely. Not how is the situation, not how is the strategy, but how are you the person, the actual human woman who grew up going to summer camp with me and cried at every sad movie we ever watched and once ate an entire cheesecake after a bad breakup at 23. "I'm sad," Emma said. Diana didn't say anything. She just waited. "Not about him specifically," Emma continued. "Not about Alexander as a person. I'm sad about the version of the future I had built. I keep catching myself thinking about things I was looking forward to. Stupid things. We had talked about going to Portugal in the spring. I had been reading about Lisbon for months." She looked at her wine glass. "That's the kind of thing that gets you. Not the big betrayals, the small futures that aren't going to happen." "That's grief," Diana said quietly. "That's exactly what grief is." "I know," Emma said. "I'm letting myself have it." She paused. "I'm just not letting it run the meeting." Diana almost laughed. "Only you would describe processing grief as running a meeting." "Is that terrible?" "No," Diana said. "It's very you, which is not terrible. It's just very you." They finished dinner. They walked a few blocks in the October air. Diana hugged her on the sidewalk and said, "Call me when it gets heavy." And Emma said she would and meant it, and then she got in a cab and went home. She slept 7 hours that night. The first time she had slept more than 5 in 3 weeks. She woke up and felt marginally but genuinely better. The audit produced its preliminary findings on day 41. Emma received the summary through Patricia, who called at 8 in the morning and said, "You need to come in, today." She was in Patricia's office by 9. The preliminary findings covered 47 pages. Emma read them in an hour and 15 minutes, which was fast even for her. Patricia sat across the desk and watched her read and said nothing until Emma set the document down and looked up. "The expense approvals," Emma said. "Yes," Patricia said. "They weren't just within technical authority," Emma said. "Some of them were structured specifically to fall within her authority. Someone designed them that way." "That's what the auditors believe," Patricia said. "The question is who designed them?" Emma looked at the document again. The pattern was clear once you saw it: a series of expense approvals, each individually unremarkable, each falling just under the threshold that would have required a second signature, spread across 18 months, connected to vendors that turned out upon examination to be connected to accounts that benefited Claire personally. "She was more sophisticated than I thought," Emma said. "She's been in that office for 6 years," Patricia said. "She understood the approval structure better than most of the CFO's team." "And Alexander?" Patricia's expression shifted. "The auditors haven't determined yet whether he knew. The evidence suggests he didn't design it. Whether he noticed it and chose not to look closely, that's a different question." Emma sat with that for a moment. There was a version of Alexander, the version she wanted not to exist, the version that made the whole thing worse, who had known, who had seen the pattern and understood it, and decided that what Claire was doing was a form of compensation he could tolerate because it kept her close and kept the personal arrangement stable. And there was a version of Alexander who had simply not looked, who had been so focused on the larger performance of running a company that he had never looked carefully at the details of the system he was running. She didn't know which version was true. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Does it change the divorce terms?" she said. "It strengthens your position significantly," Patricia said. "If he knew, even if he simply chose not to look, that represents a breach of fiduciary duty that affects the marital estate. Your attorneys can argue that his failure to disclose this to the board, to investors, to you, constitutes a material misrepresentation in the context of the marriage." "That's not why I asked," Emma said. Patricia looked at her. "I'm asking because if it changes what he's liable for, it changes what the employees are exposed to," Emma said. "If he's personally liable for Claire's conduct, the company's exposure decreases. And if the company's exposure decreases, the restructuring is cleaner." Patricia studied her for a moment. "You're protecting the company." "I'm protecting the 4,000 people in it," Emma said. "There's a difference." Patricia almost smiled. "Your father used to say something similar." "My father taught me that capital is a tool," Emma said. "The question is always what you're building with it." What happened next was not in any document or financial record or board communication. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, day 44 of the audit, when Alexander Carter showed up at the lobby of Whitmore Capital's offices without an appointment and asked the receptionist if Emma Whitmore was available. The receptionist called upstairs. Emma's assistant relayed the message. Emma was in a meeting with 2 portfolio managers reviewing Q3 performance. She listened to her assistant, thanked her, and said, "Tell him I'll be down in 15 minutes. She finished the meeting. She gathered nothing. No portfolio, no documents, nothing that would signal this was a professional encounter. She went downstairs in exactly 14 minutes. I was standing near the window in the lobby. He looked like a man who had lost 10 pounds, and not in a way that suited him. His suit still fit well, he would always have that, but something in the way he held himself had changed. The forward lean of a man perpetually ready for the next thing had become something more upright, more deliberate, like someone who had learned to be careful about momentum. "I don't have much time," she said, coming to stand across from him. "I know," he said. "I'll be quick." He looked at her directly. "The auditors found the expense pattern." "I know," she said. "I didn't know," he said. "I want you to know that specifically. I didn't know she had structured them that way. I knew the expenses existed, I saw them in aggregate, but I didn't examine the architecture." He paused. "I should have. That's not an excuse. It's a failure of oversight that I own. But I didn't know." Emma looked at him. She was very good at reading people better than most, because she listened more than she spoke, and she had developed over many years a sensitivity to the gap between what people said and what their bodies did when they said it. Alexander was not performing this. He was not managing her perception. He was standing in a lobby without an appointment, looking like a man who needed to say something true, and had driven across the city to say it in person, because saying it by phone felt insufficient. "I believe you," she said. He exhaled. "It doesn't change the audit findings," she said, "or the board's process, or the divorce proceedings." I know, he said. That's not why I came. Then why did you come? He looked at her for a moment. Because I've spent 6 weeks understanding things I should have understood 2 years ago. And one of those things is that you deserve to know the truth about Claire's conduct from someone who isn't just presenting evidence at a board meeting. He paused. You deserve to hear me say it, directly. I didn't set that up. I didn't design it. And the moment I understood what she had done, I told my attorney to cooperate fully with the audit, whatever that costs me personally. Emma was quiet. The lobby was moving around them, people coming and going, phones ringing somewhere at the desk, the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday afternoon. In the middle of all of it, Emma Whitmore and Alexander Carter stood across from each other and had the first genuinely honest conversation they had probably ever had. "What are you going to do?" she said, "after all of this?" I thought about it. I don't know yet. That's a strange feeling for me, not knowing what comes next. He looked at his hands briefly. I've always had a next. There's always been a plan, a company, a target. Right now, I just have a lot of very quiet days and a great deal of thinking. That's not nothing, she said. No, he agreed. I'm starting to understand that. She looked at him. This man she had chosen. This man who had failed her so completely and who was standing here now, doing the thing she had not expected from him, not performing contrition, not managing damage, not calculating the angle, just standing in front of her with the facts of himself and nothing else. Alexander, she said, I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it as what it is, not as a negotiating position, not as strategy, just as a true thing. All right, he said. The company is worth saving, she said. The real company, the one underneath your myth of yourself. The engineering teams, the security division, the sales operation. It's genuinely good. The people who built it deserve to see it succeed. She paused. I'm going to make sure it does. Through the restructuring, through whatever leadership comes after the audit, through the investment commitment that I intend to finalize once the governance corrections are in place. He stared at her. You're going to complete the investment, he said. Yes. After everything. Because of everything, she said. Because I've looked at it more carefully than I looked at it before, and it stands up. And because 4,000 people should not pay for the choices of one. He was quiet for a long moment. Why are you telling me this? He said. Because you came here to tell me a true thing, she said. I'm returning the favor. She looked at him steadily, and she said the last thing she needed to say to him, the thing she had been carrying since the night she walked into that hotel suite in her wedding dress, and understood with the particular clarity of real pain who she was dealing with. You asked me once if I ever thought what we had was real, she said. I told you yes. I want to add to that. She held his gaze. The part that was real, my part, it was worth something. It was worth exactly what I put into it. And I'm not going to let what you did with it make me believe that choosing to believe in someone was a mistake. It wasn't. Your failure to be worthy of it, that was the mistake. That was yours, not mine. He nodded. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She turned and walked back to the elevator. She pressed the button. She rode upstairs. She walked back into the building where she spent her days, past the people who worked for her and around her and beside her, back to her desk where the documents were waiting, where the analysis was waiting, where the work that was real and hers and entirely her own was waiting. And she sat down. And she picked up her pen. 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon at 4:45, Patricia called and said, the divorce filing has been accepted. We're officially in process. How long? Emma said. 6 to 8 months, possibly less given the asset documentation we have in place. And the settlement framework. Alexander's team has agreed to the preliminary terms. He's not fighting it. His attorney told me. Patricia paused, and Emma could hear in that pause something that surprised Patricia, which was not easy to do. His attorney told me that Alexander has instructed him to ensure the settlement is fair, not aggressive on his behalf, fair. Emma sat with that. All right, she said. Emma, he's giving you more than he's legally required to. I know, she said. Does that change anything for you? Emma thought about the lobby, about the 10 pounds he'd lost, about the forward lean that had become something more careful. No, she said. It doesn't change what happened, but it changes what I think of him. She paused. Slightly. Is that enough? It's not about enough, Emma said. It's just true, and I've decided I'm only interested in true things now. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father would have liked the woman you are right now." Emma felt that land somewhere real. "Thank you," she said softly. She hung up. She looked out the window at the city that had always been hers, that she had never needed anyone to give her access to, because she had always been of it, born into it, shaped by it, built from it. The city that had been 42 floors below her on the worst night of her life, and had continued its business without waiting for her to catch up the way it always did. She had caught up. She had done more than catch up. On the following Monday, Whitmore Capital sent a formal communication to Carter Global's board confirming its intention to finalize the investment commitment upon completion of the audit and implementation of the proposed governance restructuring. The communication was signed by Emma Whitmore in her capacity as primary decision-maker for the relevant investment vehicles. Reynolds called her personally. "Emma," he said, "I want you to know that the full board is grateful. What you've done here, the way you've handled this situation, is not what we expected. It's better." "I appreciate that," she said. "I also want to say—" He paused, and Reynolds was not a man who paused often. "What you've been through personally in the middle of all of this. We see it, the board sees it. And the fact that you never let the personal become the professional, that you kept this about the company's integrity and the employees' well-being, that's leadership, real leadership, the kind we could use more of." Emma was quiet. Then she said, "I'm going to hold you to that, Harold." He laughed. "A real one. I thought you might." The audit concluded on day 61, one day over schedule, which Patricia noted was actually extraordinary given the complexity of what they'd found. The final report confirmed the expense pattern connected to Claire's account, confirmed that the evidence did not support Alexander's direct knowledge of the structured approvals, and recommended a series of governance reforms that the board moved to implement immediately. Claire reached a settlement agreement with the company. The terms were confidential. She left Carter Global quietly, without statement, without drama. Emma did not track what happened to her after. She had made a decision early in this process that her attention would go toward what she was building, not toward what was ending. Claire's story was Claire's to carry. Alexander's administrative leave was extended by the board pending a leadership transition. A search firm was engaged to identify a new CEO. Alexander retained his equity position. He retained his seat on the advisory board in a non-operational capacity. He was in the end not destroyed. He was reduced from the center of his own world to one voice among several, which was, Emma thought, probably appropriate. On the day the audit report was published internally, Emma was in her office when her assistant knocked and said, "There's a delivery for you." It was a small box. Inside was a bottle of Portuguese wine, a very good one from a small vineyard in the Douro Valley, and a card. The card said, "For the trip you're going to take without me, it should be a good one. A." Emma held the card for a moment, then she set it down. She looked at the bottle. She thought about Lisbon, about the small futures she had grieved over dinner with Diana, about the particular sadness of things that didn't happen the way you imagined them. She picked up her phone. She called Diana. "I need a travel companion," she said. "Spring, Lisbon." Diana screamed loud enough that Emma had to hold the phone away from her ear. She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed from somewhere completely uncalculated since before the wedding, and it felt like something coming back online after a long outage, tentative at first, then stronger, then entirely itself. She set the wine on the corner of her desk where she could see it. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. But something was different now in the work and in the woman doing it. Something had been stripped away, not the capability, not the precision, not the steady competence she had always carried, but the part of her that had been quietly, persistently hoping that someone else would see it and name it and choose her for it. That part was done waiting. She didn't need to be chosen. She had chosen herself. And in the choosing, she had become something she had always been, but had never quite had the room to fully inhabit. Not just the calm one, not just the capable one, not just the woman behind the investment, or the heiress, or the bride. Emma Whitmore, a woman who knew exactly what she was worth, and who would never again accept anything less. The bottle of Portuguese wine sat on the corner of Emma's desk for 3 months. She looked at it every day, not with sadness exactly. By February, sadness had mostly finished its work on her, had done what grief does when you let it do its job honestly, which is to move through you rather than set up permanent residence. She looked at it the way you look at a scar that has healed cleanly, acknowledging it, understanding what it cost, and finding that the cost had purchased something real. She was not the same woman she had been in October. She was not worse. She was not harder. She was not the brittle, armored version of herself that some people become after being hurt by someone they chose carefully and trusted completely. She was clearer. That was the word she kept returning to. Not the word she had used before the wedding, certain the word she had held on to like a talisman, but something more honest than certainty. Certainty was about being sure of the future. Clarity was about being sure of yourself, regardless of what the future did. She was clear. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday in late January, 8 days ahead of Patricia's most optimistic estimate. Patricia called her at 2 in the afternoon and said simply, "It's done." And Emma said, "Thank you." And they stayed on the phone for a moment in the particular silence of two women who had done something difficult together and were acknowledging it without making a production of it. "How do you feel?" Patricia said. "Like I can breathe," Emma said. "Good," Patricia said. "That's exactly right." Emma hung up. She sat at her desk. She looked at the wine bottle. She looked at the city outside her window. She thought about October, about the hotel suite and the wedding gown and the bouquet of white peonies she had set on the table before she asked Alexander how long he had planned to keep pretending. She thought about how far she had traveled since that night. Not geographically. The miles that mattered were the interior ones, the distance between the woman who had filed every doubt away and chosen to believe anyway, and the woman sitting here now who had stopped filing things away and started dealing with them directly. It was a significant distance. She picked up her phone and called Diana. "It's done," she said. Diana was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then, "We are going to Lisbon, and we are going to drink wine and eat pastries for 10 consecutive days, and you are not allowed to open your laptop once. Not once." 7 days, Emma said. 9. 8. "Done," Diana said. "March, I'm booking it today." Emma almost smiled. "Book it." She hung up. She looked at the wine bottle one more time. Then she picked it up, walked to her assistant's desk, and set it down in front of a young woman named Priya, who had worked 70-hour weeks alongside Emma since October without complaint and without explanation, because Priya was 26 and new and deeply professional and had understood that this was not the moment to ask questions. "Take this home," Emma said. "Open it with someone you love." Priya looked at the bottle. She looked at Emma. "Are you sure?" "I'm very sure," Emma said. She walked back to her office. She sat down. She started working on what came next. What came next was something Emma had been building in the margins of everything else in the spaces between audit reviews and legal documents and board communications and the ordinary demands of managing a significant investment portfolio through a period of unusual complexity. She had been building it the way she built everything, methodically, quietly, with a patience that other people sometimes mistook for inaction. It was a program, not a charitable initiative, not a philanthropic gesture, not the kind of thing that powerful people create to manage their public image after a difficult season. Something more specific than that, more pointed, more personal. She called it the Meridian Leadership Initiative, named for one of the holding vehicles through which Whitmore Capital had quietly protected Carter Global through its difficult years, a small private joke she allowed herself because she had earned the right to small private jokes. The concept was this, that the single most common source of institutional failure in mid to large companies was not strategic error or market miscalculation, but the corruption of professional judgment by personal loyalty. The specific, recurring, deeply human tendency of leaders to allow the people they were closest to, in whatever sense of closest, to operate outside the normal structures of accountability. It happened at every level of every industry. It happened because human beings were human beings, because power created intimacy, and intimacy created blind spots, and because the higher you climbed, the fewer people were willing to tell you when your blind spots were becoming structural problems. Emma had lived inside that failure from the most intimate possible vantage point. She intended to do something with what she had learned. The Meridian Initiative would work directly with companies, particularly companies undergoing leadership transitions or governance restructuring, to build what Emma described in her founding document as systems that outlast the people running them, hiring practices that distributed decision-making, accountability structures that didn't depend on any single individual's integrity, communication channels that made it safe for employees to raise concerns before those concerns became crises. She had been working on the operational framework for 2 months. By February, she had a board of advisors that included 2 former Fortune 500 CFOs, a governance attorney from Chicago, and Harold Reynolds, who had called her in early January and said without preamble, "I heard what you're building. I want to be part of it, if you'll have me." She had said yes without hesitation. Reynolds was 70 years old and had forgotten more about institutional governance than most people ever learned. More importantly, he was one of the rare people who had spent decades in powerful rooms without becoming convinced that power was the point. "You know what this is going to require," he told her, at their first advisory meeting held in the conference room where she had presented evidence to the Carter Global Board 4 months earlier. "This isn't a consulting firm. This isn't a think tank. If you do this right, you're going to be telling very powerful people very uncomfortable things about the way they run their organizations." "I know," she said. "They're not going to like it." "I know that too." "And you're all right with that?" Emma looked at him. "Harold, I told my husband of 4 hours on my wedding night that he needed to leave the hotel suite. Telling a CEO that his expense approval structure has a conflict of interest problem is a considerably smaller challenge." Reynolds laughed. It was a big laugh, unguarded, the laugh of a man who hadn't expected to be surprised and was delighted to have been. "Fair point," he said. The Carter Global restructuring was completed in March, 2 weeks before Emma and Diana boarded a flight to Lisbon. The new CEO was a woman named Sandra Park, 52 years old, 20 years in enterprise technology, a reputation for being fiercely competent and entirely uninterested in personal mythology. She had been recruited by the search firm, interviewed by the board, and presented to the investors, including Whitmore Capital, for approval. Emma had met her twice before the formal appointment. Both times she had come away with the same impression. This is someone who understands that the company is the point, not the title, not the narrative, the company. At the formal announcement, Sandra shook Emma's hand and said, "I understand you had a significant role in getting us to this point." "I had a significant stake," Emma said. "The role was the board's." Sandra looked at her with the particular attention of someone who was calibrating quickly. "You're more careful with language than most people I meet." "Words matter," Emma said, "especially in governance." Sandra nodded slowly. "I'd like to have a longer conversation with you at some point about the company's direction, not as an investor necessarily, as someone who understands it." "I'd like that too," Emma said. They shook hands again. Emma watched Sandra move through the room and felt something she recognized from the board, meeting the particular satisfaction of seeing a right thing happen. Not a perfect thing, not a fairy tale ending, a right thing, a thing that reflected reality clearly and made a sensible response to it. She had done that, not alone, with Patricia and Michael and Reynolds and the auditors and the board members who had the courage to vote the way the evidence pointed. But she had started it. She had walked out of a hotel suite on her wedding night with white flowers in her hand and made a phone call at 12:47 in the morning, and that phone call had set in motion a sequence of events that ended with 4,000 people working for a company that was now genuinely better run than it had been the day before. She was allowed to feel that. She felt it. Then she went home and finished packing for Lisbon. Lisbon was everything Diana had promised, and nothing Emma had imagined, which was the best possible outcome. She had imagined it as a trip that would carry weight, the unfinished trip, the small future she had grieved now reclaimed. And it did carry some of that. The first morning, sitting in a small cafe with a coffee and a pastel de nata, while the city's particular light came through the window, she thought about Alexander's card and the wine she had given to Priya and the distance between the version of this trip she had planned and the version she was having. She thought about it for about 6 minutes. Then Diana sat down across from her with 2 more pastries and said, "I found us a boat tour at 2 o'clock and a fado restaurant for tonight, and I need you to be completely present for all of it, because I am not carrying this vacation for both of us." Emma laughed, and then she was present. She was present for the boat tour and the fado and the long dinners and the afternoons in bookshops and the mornings she climbed to a viewpoint and stood with her face in the wind and felt for the first time since October that she was not managing anything. Not her emotions, not a situation, not a narrative. She was just standing somewhere beautiful, being herself, and it was enough. On the 6th day, Diana said over wine at dinner, "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to ask it anyway," Emma said. "Do you think you'll trust someone again like that way?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Really." "I'm not closing myself off," Emma said. "That would be the wrong lesson. The lesson isn't don't trust people. The lesson is know yourself well enough that you can tell the difference between choosing to believe and choosing to ignore." She turned her wine glass slowly. "I chose to believe in Alexander. That was real. What I'm learning to do is catch the moments when believing crosses into ignoring. That's the line I missed." "How do you know where the line is?" "You don't always," Emma said, "but you get better at it. You get better at listening to the things you're filing away instead of just filing them." She paused. "I had a filing cabinet full of doubts about Alexander. I just never opened it until I had to." Diana looked at her. "You're different." "I know. It's not bad different. It's just you're more present than I've ever seen you. Even when things were good with Alexander, you were always slightly, I don't know, slightly behind glass, like you were watching your own life from a slight distance." Emma considered that. "I think that's accurate," she said. "I think I was managing my life rather than living it. And then everything went wrong and I couldn't manage it fast enough and I had to just be in it. Actually be in it. And I found out I'm actually fine in it," she said. "Better than fine." Diana raised her glass. Emma raised hers. They drank. They came home from Lisbon on a Sunday. Emma was back in her office by Monday morning, which Diana found predictable and Emma found necessary, not because she couldn't rest, but because the work was waiting, and the work was genuinely hers, and there was a particular pleasure in returning to it after 8 days of being completely away. Priya had left a note on her desk that said, "The wine was incredible. Thank you." She had also left a perfectly organized stack of the things that needed Emma's attention ranked by urgency, with a summary of each attached. Emma read through it. She marked 3 things urgent flag 2 for later in the week and set the rest aside. Then she opened the Meridian Initiative folder. In the 2 weeks she had been preparing for and recovering from the Lisbon trip, the initiative had gained 2 more corporate partners, a mid-size pharmaceutical company in New Jersey that had recently survived its own governance crisis and wanted to rebuild its accountability structures, and a financial services firm in Chicago, whose new leadership team had specifically requested the kind of institutional restructuring framework Emma's document outlined. She had a meeting with the pharmaceutical company on Wednesday. She had a call with the Chicago firm on Thursday. She had a presentation to 3 potential advisory board additions on Friday. She was building something. She could feel it the way she felt a good investment in its early stages. Not flashy, not certain in the way that performances of certainty are certain, but solid, grounded, built on something real. It was April, 6 months since the wedding. It felt like a different life. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd week of April. Emma was between meetings standing at her window with a cup of coffee when her phone showed an unknown number she almost didn't answer. She answered it because she always answered unknown numbers, because she had learned that the calls you don't expect are sometimes the ones that matter. Emma Whitmore. The voice was a woman's professional direct with a slight southern accent that put her somewhere in the mid-Atlantic corridor. "Yes," Emma said. "My name is Catherine Marsh. I'm the editor of a business leadership publication. We've been following the Carter Global restructuring with significant interest, and I understand that Whitmore Capital played a central role in what happened, both in triggering the audit process and in ensuring the company's stability throughout the transition." Emma was quiet for a moment. "What can I do for you, Ms. Marsh?" "I'd like to speak with you about a profile," Catherine said. "Not about Carter Global specifically, about you. About the Meridian Initiative, about what you've built and what drove you to build it." Emma thought about this. She thought about a lifetime of being the calm one, the quiet one, the woman behind the investment. She thought about 6 months of choosing herself loudly and privately, without press, without profile, without the performance of rebuilding that some people in her position would have gravitated toward. She thought about why the initiative existed. If it was going to do what she wanted it to do, if it was going to reach the companies that needed it, the leaders who were smart enough to want to do better, and needed someone to show them how it needed to be visible, not Emma Whitmore, public figure, but the ideas, the framework, the argument she was making about what good leadership actually looked like. "Tell me about your readership," she said. Catherine told her. Emma listened carefully. "All right," she said. "Send me the proposal in writing. I'll review it." "Of course," Catherine said. "One more thing if you don't mind." "Go ahead." "The Carter Global situation, the personal dimension of it, your marriage, is that something you'd be willing to discuss, not salaciously, in the context of how it informed what you built afterward?" Emma looked out the window at the city. She thought about what it meant to make private pain useful, not to perform it, not to weaponize it, not to build an identity around having survived something, but to take what it had taught her and put it somewhere it could help someone else. "Yes," she said. "In that context, yes." The profile was published 6 weeks later. It ran 4,000 words in a business publication that reached exactly the kind of readership Emma had wanted: board members, senior executives, governance professionals. The people who made the decisions that shaped how institutions behaved toward their own employees and their own investors and their own futures. The piece was careful, precise, and did not sensationalize. It told the story of what had happened at Carter Global in the language of governance and institutional integrity rather than personal drama. It described Emma's role not as the aggrieved wife who had gotten her revenge, but as the investor who had applied the same standard of scrutiny to a personal situation that she applied to every professional one, and who had then taken what she learned and built something designed to prevent the same failures in other organizations. The response was not what Emma expected. She had expected professional interest. She had expected the kind of measured acknowledgement that serious publications generate in serious professional circles, respectful, engaged, swiftly moving on to the next thing. What she got was hundreds of emails. From men and women she had never met. From junior employees at large companies who had watched exactly this kind of dynamic play out in their own organizations and had never seen anyone with enough power to address it actually do so. From board members at companies who had been quietly worried about exactly these governance gaps and now had a framework and a contact. From women who had navigated the intersection of personal and professional in positions of power and who recognized in Emma's story something they had never seen publicly articulated before. She read every email. She did not respond to all of them because there were not enough hours in a day, but she read every one. She had Priya sort them by category, and she worked through them systematically, responding personally to everyone that identified a specific institutional problem the Meridian Initiative might address. 3 of those emails led to new partnerships. One led to something she hadn't anticipated. A woman named Grace Holloway, 63 years old, recently retired CFO of a Chicago manufacturing company, sent an email that began, "I spent 40 years watching what you described happen. I always thought there was nothing to do about it except outlast it. I'd like to talk to you about whether that's still true." Emma called her directly. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. By the end of the call, Grace had agreed to join the Meridian Initiative's advisory board, and Emma had gained something she hadn't realized. She was looking for someone who had been doing this long enough to have perspective that Emma's 6 months of intensity could not yet provide. "You're going to make mistakes," Grace told her near the end of the call. "Not because you're not capable, because this is genuinely hard and you're doing it in real time. The important thing is to have people around you who will tell you when you're making them." "Is that what you're offering?" Emma said. "That's exactly what I'm offering," Grace said. "If you want it." "I want it," Emma said. "Good," Grace said. "Then let's get to work." In May, Sandra Park called Emma to say that Carter Global's Q1 results under her leadership had exceeded projections, not by a spectacular margin. Sandra was not interested in spectacular margins generated by short-term decisions that compromised long-term stability, which was itself a significant departure from the culture Alexander had built, but meaningfully, solidly, the kind of performance that told investors and board members and employees alike that the foundation was sound and the direction was real. "I wanted you to hear it from me first," Sandra said. "Thank you," Emma said. "How are the teams?" "Steadier than I expected given everything," Sandra said. "People are good at resilience when they believe the institution is actually trying to earn it." A pause. "Your initiative, the Meridian Framework. I'd like to implement some of it internally, with your involvement if that's something you'd consider." Emma thought about it. Not long. She had been thinking about it in the background for weeks. "Send me a proposal," she said. "Already drafted," Sandra said, and Emma could hear the smile in it. "I'll send it today." Emma hung up and sat for a moment with the particular quality of satisfaction that comes from watching something you helped fix actually stay fixed. It was not a triumphant feeling. Triumph was too loud for this, too performed. It was quieter than that, more private. The feeling of standing in a structure you helped build and finding it sturdy. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. Summer arrived, the way it always arrived in New York, suddenly, completely, with the specific energy of a city that has been waiting for warmth and now intends to make the most of every hour of it. Emma noticed it the way she noticed most things she wasn't managing with genuine pleasure, without agenda. She was different in summer than she had been in winter. Not in the way she worked or the decisions she made or the precision with which she moved through her days, but in some quieter register, in the ease with which she moved through an evening, in her willingness to be somewhere without a purpose, in the small pleasures she had started paying attention to again after months of treating rest as a resource and nothing more. She went to Central Park on Sunday mornings. She called her mother more than professionally necessary. She had 3 genuine friendships that she was tending carefully, including one with Diana that had deepened into the kind of friendship that only survives real crisis, the kind where you have seen each other at the bottom and chosen to stay. She was not healed exactly. She did not believe in healed as a destination. It suggested a return to what you were before, and she had no interest in returning to what she was before. She believed in forward. She believed in built rather than restored. She was built. September arrived, nearly a year since the wedding. Emma did not mark the exact date on her calendar. She did not plan anything around it. She noticed it the way you notice an anniversary of something that shaped you, not with the intensity it once would have carried, but with a kind of acknowledgement, a nod to the distance traveled. On that day, the last Saturday of September, a year and 1 week after she had stood in a hotel suite in a wedding gown and understood something that broke and built her simultaneously, Emma received a final message from Alexander. Not a call, a handwritten note sent to her office delivered by messenger. She opened it at her desk alone in the late afternoon when the building was mostly quiet. It was short. It said, "I have been thinking for a year about what I would say if I had the chance to say it without an attorney present and without anything left to gain from saying it. The honest answer is that I don't have words sufficient for what I did, which is itself something I'm still working on understanding. What I do have is this: I watched what you built this year. Not from close enough to have any right to an opinion about it, but I watched it. And I want you to know that the person I thought I was marrying, the composed, capable, appropriate person I had decided you were, is considerably less impressive than the person you actually turned out to be. I'm sorry I couldn't see that when it would have mattered. I hope you're well. I mean that with no agenda attached. A." Emma read it twice. She held it for a moment. She thought about the man who had grabbed her wrist in a hotel doorway and told her she was early. She thought about the man who had shown up without an appointment in a lobby and told her a true thing because he needed to say it in person. She thought about the gap between those 2 versions of Alexander Carter and what it had cost both of them to cross it. She set the note down. She did not write back. Not because she was cold, not because she was punishing him, but because there was nothing left that needed to be said. He had said a true thing. She had received it. The account was settled. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked through the office, past Priya's desk, past the conference room where the Meridian Initiative's first full partner meeting had taken place 3 weeks earlier, past the window that looked out over the city she had always loved and had never needed anyone to give her access to. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the lobby button. She rode down. She walked through the lobby and through the glass doors and out into the September evening, and the city was exactly what it always was: enormous, indifferent, perpetually in motion, generating its own noise and its own momentum and its own relentless demand to be engaged with. She loved it. She walked. No destination, no agenda, no meeting to get to. Just Emma Whitmore in the city that was hers, moving through the evening with her hands in her pockets and her face in the air, a woman who had spent a year walking through fire with her eyes open and had come out the other side, not unburned, but entirely recognizably herself. More herself actually than she had ever been. She thought about what Diana had said in Lisbon, slightly behind glass, watching your own life from a distance, and she thought about the difference between then and now, about what it felt like to be fully inside her own life behind no glass, managing nothing present for everything. This was what choosing yourself actually meant. Not a declaration, not a dramatic gesture, not the performance of strength. Just this knowing your own worth so completely that you never again had to wait for someone else to confirm it. Just this building the things that mattered with the hands you actually had. Just this walking through your own city on a September evening, 1 year past the worst night of your life, and knowing cleanly, completely, without a single doubt, needing to be filed away, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Emma Whitmore had been the calm one her entire life. Now she understood what calm actually meant. Not stillness, not compliance, not the performance of composure for rooms that needed managing. Calm was what you had when you knew yourself, and she knew herself now, completely. She walked on, and she did not look back.